gonna get started here. If you feel like you want more coffee or snacks during the presentation, if you're here, feel free to just pop up and get it. As you can see, we have a surround sound classroom. And so you will be recorded because we have this cute little owl here, but you'll be recorded no matter where you are. So feel free to grab a snack, whatever you need. Yeah, welcome to the first of a few that we have in this series between CETL and CDAR, which is fantastic. Today we have Katelyn Gash, the Assistant Director in CETL, and Jeneba Hoene. Did I say your last name right? No, I absolutely didn't. It's a wonky one. Yeah, I know. And every time I look at it, I know that I've said your last name a million times, and then I look at it and I say, I'm saying it wrong, and then I say it wrong.
It's when you look at it. Good. That's when it trips you up. You have to like not look at her last name.
Yeah.
And then you're like, I know how it is.
Yes. Yes, Jeneba Hoene. Yes. Boom. There we go. Second time's a charm. Who's an access consultant in CETL. And so today they are going to share with us some amazing knowledge. So I will leave it to them so we can give to them the biggest part of this hour. Yay. Here we go.
Yeah, perfect. So just like Beth said, I am Katelyn Gash. I'm the Assistant Director here at CETL. So previously, before this role, I was in education, the K through 12 setting. I was a special education teacher. And then for many years, I was a caregiver for adults with disabilities. And I've been in this role now for going on 3 years. And then I will let Jeneba kind of talk about herself and give a quick introduction.
My name is Jeneba, and I am an access consultant with CETL. I started at UPI back in like 2018 professionally, transitioned to working with students and adults with disabilities for the state. Then Moscow decided to pull me back and I started working for the university again. And then this role came open going on a year and a half, 2 years, maybe for 2 years now. And so I've been in that role again.
Perfect. So yeah, today we'll be talking about accommodations, our process, what makes an accommodation reasonable, how we get there, and hopefully answering some questions at the end.
Yes, I think, does this clicker work to click the slides?
Yes, it should.
All right, perfect. So the big question, why does CETL exist? So CETL at its core serves students with disability. Our job is to provide access, not advantage, by working with students to determine reasonable accommodations. Accommodations are simply just adjustments that help remove barriers so students have equal opportunity to participate at the university, whether that's classes, programs, or campus activities. Why does this matter? Why is CETL here? These matter because the University of Idaho is legally required to provide equal and integrated access under federal law, which includes the ADA and Section 504. And so CETL helps the university meet these requirements while also supporting staff, faculty, and navigating accommodations appropriately.
And so we wanted to take a look at the WHO. And so this is a snapshot of the students that we served last academic year. So fall 2024, spring 2025. And they're broken into these kind of different buckets. Some of them are combined, and I'll just go through them just to provide a couple examples. So the biggest slice of our pie is going to be students with psychological disabilities. This is going to be primarily students with like anxiety and depression, but also things like bipolar and schizophrenia, PTSD. The next slice of the pie is going to be our ADHD folks. Next up, we have our chronic medical and health. This is going to be our students with things like chronic migraines, POTS, seizures, arthritis, things like that. Next up, we have our cognitive and learning disabilities. So this is going to be our students with things like dyslexia, dyscalculia, as well as like learning disabilities in reading comprehension and things like that. Next up, we have our autistic students, students on the spectrum. And then from here, we transition to our students that are kind of in this other general temporary bucket altogether. And this is going to include a whole bunch of different things. So this is going to include our students who are in need of surgeries or recovering from surgeries, our students who go home for winter break and break their leg, and then all of a sudden are like, how am I going to navigate all the hills on Moscow campus? It also includes things where like students might not know what's going on and they're in the process of figuring out what that looks like, and they're like, hey, I know something's not right. But and then rounding it out here, we have our students that are blind or visually impaired, deaf, hard of hearing, as well as our students with mobility impairments, who perhaps using wheelchairs, canes, crutches, and then potentially transportation services. And then lastly, we also have our students with things like traumatic brain injuries. And so these numbers next to them are accurate for how many students have reported those disabilities and are set up with our office. But it's important to note that students may fall into multiple categories. And so these numbers are not just like students' primary disability. Often many of them are falling into multiple of these categories. So that is the who. As far as the how, CETR, like all disability offices in institutions of higher ed across the nation, is held to the standard that we are legally required to engage in what's called the interactive process. And so this process starts with a student self-identifying. So we don't go tracking students down. We don't get their records from high school. They come and seek us out. The responsibility is on them. They identify that they have disability-related barriers that are impacting them on campus. And so then they get set up through our office. And so they'll apply, we'll connect. Typically it's going to be their meeting with Katelyn or I, but we also have some other staff that they can meet with. And then throughout that process, we go through a bunch of eligibility questions, reasonable accommodations, what's worked for them, what hasn't. Once they get set up with accommodations in our office, that's where that gets then pushed out to the instructors for those courses. And so students have full control over what accommodations that they've been approved for get applied to each of their classes. So some of them might apply it to all of their classes, some of it might only apply to one or two of their classes. From there, it's a combination of the instructor and the student and CETR working together to make sure that access needs are being met. So the student has responsibilities to make sure that they are connecting with the instructor to make sure that they are requesting that their accommodations be met. They have the responsibility to schedule tests and connect with our office if there's questions. Instructors should be connecting with us if they're not sure and things like that. And we're happy to help with any step of the process. That's kind of the zoomed out version. I want to kind of walk through what that would look like with an actual student. So we'll have a hypothetical student. Let's say we have Peter Parker. He presents to our office and he's like, hey, I have some disabilities. I have ADHD. I have anxiety. I know tests really stress me out. I'm not so great with deadlines. He's requesting testing accommodations and maybe extensions on assignments. So that student connects with our office, meets with typically Katelyn and I again, and we're going to sit through, look at the documentation, look at what is reasonable. Typically with testing, we might, based off of the conversation, Peter might be walking out with some perhaps extended testing time and the option to take his test in a different reduced distraction area. CETR will take care of, be able to offer some of those things. As far as the assignments, there likely isn't a disability related need for extensions on assignments. So we might route Peter to something like an accommodation for advance notice and a referral to like academic coaching to get him connected with campus resources, helping with that executive functioning, planning, organization piece. Then Peter applies those accommodations. The instructor gets that beautiful accommodation letter in their inbox with those accommodations that Peter has applied. And that's going to prompt the instructor to input their test information. Instructors only have to do this once per class, not for every single student. If you have questions about the instructor portal and exam proctoring instructions and all of that, you're in luck because next month's session in the CETL series is all about the instructor portal and will be presented by our assistive tech associate director.
Eric's title.
It's
a big one.
And the head of our CETR testing program as well. So they'll be able to answer those questions in more depth and get into the nitty gritty. Once the instructor has done their part and then updating that information in the portal, then it's on the student to schedule their tests. It's on the student to request that advance notice if they feel like their needs aren't being met. And CETR is there to help clarify for either this instructor or the student, modify if the student's needs aren't being met, things like that. Yeah, and so then we engage with that process. If Peter's doing really great for the first 3 years of schooling and then all of a sudden his needs change or he's in a different track and he's like, hey, these aren't working, then we go back and modify.
So in order to qualify for ADA or 504 accommodations, a student must present with documentation. So we have to have 3 elements from the qualified licensed professional. So a diagnosis, the functional limitations in relation to that disability, and then the need for accommodations. There are some accommodations that require further requirements. So housing accommodations, we need to know your functional limitations related to housing. And then remote attendance and memory aids, those require much more specific documentation that we explain in meetings to the students.
Yeah. Question. Does the Disability Center, I'm sorry, I'm new, I'm not sure what they call it now, but do they provide testing for like learning disabilities or anything like that?
Yeah, so our office does not. We don't diagnose students, but on campus,
The counseling center.
yes, the Counseling and Mental Health Center, they do psychological exams, and they have a whole process. But yeah, they can do testing.
It used to be on a sliding scale as far as what they
It
charge.
still is,
Okay,
yeah.
great.
Yeah, still on a sliding scale. And so we use a combination of student self-report. So that's the interactive process. That's when we're meeting with the students and we're asking them, like, what are your barriers? What are you struggling with? We look at observations and interactions that we're having with the student in the meeting. So just seeing how they're, how they're reacting to our questions, Sometimes we look at like, oh, you've no-showed us 3 times. Like, what is, maybe anxiety really is a barrier here. And then we also look at documentation. It's important to know that just because the doctor puts it on documentation does not guarantee that the student's going to get it. We just need to know the diagnosis from the doctor. What's also important to know about our office is a lot of times students don't come to college with their medical records, or they're living on their own and they're like, I've always suspected I've had a disability, but my parents said, grow out of it, like you're fine. So we do offer 2 grace periods. So you can have your accommodations for 2 semesters while you explore documentation, while you get documentation. So we never just want to like turn a student away because of documentation. We're going to work with you and see what we can do. So these are just some common accommodations that we have. This isn't everything we offer. And it's important to know that these accommodations are assigned on a case-by-case basis. So testing, it's still that same test, it just might be in a different format. So whether it's the environment, the time, the resources permitted on the exam. For note-taking, we're going to get you set up with software that can help you take notes. So audio recording, the use of electronic devices, potentially peer note takers, captionists. Attendance-based accommodations excuse absences for disability-related symptoms or medical appointments, and they can also sometimes include some flexibility with assignments. Physical accommodations have to do with alterations to the physical space to make sure it's accessible. So room relocation, preferential seating, adaptive equipment, rest periods, and also service dogs and ASL interpreters fall under that.
And so of those accommodations that were just shared, those are generally our most common, but then we also wanted to provide the numbers to back this up. So this data is from fall 2025, so very recent, just from last semester. And this is a snapshot of our students. And so I'm really gonna like hammer points on the top 3 of those ones. So the alternative testing, the reason that number is so high is because there is a bucket of all the testing accommodations, and it's not uncommon, more common than not, that students will have multiple testing accommodations. So like Peter Parker, he had the option for a reduced distraction environment using our CDAR testing center, as well as a time extension. So oftentimes students are having 2 or more testing accommodations. So that number is going to be for each of those individual things. Approval to record, like Katelyn mentioned, this is going to be one of the primary ways that we are meeting students' note-taking needs. So if students have a physical barrier to handwriting or have difficulties with the processing speeds and things like that. This is, we have lots of cool options and technologies available for that. We've got different options for students based off of their preferences and needs. And then alternative format textbooks. This is going to also include, like alternative testing, different accommodations under that as well. And so this might include printing off a hard copy in enlarged print for a visually impaired student. This might also look like getting a student set up with appropriate text-to-speech software so that they can access their reading materials in a format that's accessible to them. The nice thing about all of those accommodations is that we have dedicated staff at CEDAR that is incredibly knowledgeable and works with those students to get them meeting their accommodations for testing, getting them set up with those softwares, troubleshooting it, teaching them how to use it. All of those things, printing off their textbooks and all of that jazz. And so we have some dedicated staff that are able to help with those. And so, yeah, some options we've got.
With the approval to record in the alt text the alternative format textbooks. It's important to know that we also don't charge students for those software. So when the students need help with note-taking software, we're getting them not only set up with the software, but we're also taking care of the cost. If there's something in particular they want to use, they would then pay for it themselves. But we have multiple options for them to try, and we're always letting them know that that's an option. Just because one software doesn't work doesn't mean we can't try another one.
Yes. We cannot be charging students with disabilities more than their peers. The one caveat to that, of course, though, is that we also cannot provide things for free that students are expected to pay for themselves. There's a whole process with textbooks that students need to get in a version that works for them, and then we can change that format as needed for access needs. Yeah. Alrighty. So with accommodations, their full purpose is to create access, but they do not guarantee a student's success. Students with disabilities should be held to the same academic standards as their peers. So the accommodations are there in place to remove the barriers that are present. Sometimes we hear that like students feel like they're working twice as hard as their peers to get half as much results. And so accommodations are designed to kind of level that playing field. Where we can't remove the barriers, let's mitigate them, let's reduce them, let's get them connected to resources to help kind of support them. And so the accommodations there to act as supports and tools. It's important to know that accommodations cannot modify the content requirements of the course. We can get creative about how those requirements are met, but we can't change them because those students are held to the same standards. If there's a concern that accommodations are fundamentally altering the course, that is where we go through in the interactive process, fundamental alteration process. And you hear those words and you're like, I want to know more about that. You're also in luck because the April session of the series is presented by our director, Corey Voss, specifically about that process to dig into the nitty gritty, since that can be really in depth and get in the weeds for a lot of things. But kind of zooming out, accommodations are there to be reasonable and appropriate. We make sure that accommodation processes, that students that are approaching our office with similar barriers are getting the same services wherever possible. Obviously, things are case by case. Every student with ADHD might not have the same barriers, may not need the same accommodations. And so it is very dependent on the students' barriers, what supports they have, how we're interacting with that. But we also make sure that we are following the guidance of our national guidance, making sure that we're in line with accommodation rates and processes with Idaho institutions, as well as our national institutions. And so accommodations are going to depend on the class and the class requirements. They're going to be in that gray area. It's going to look different for an exercise class versus a lab versus a lecture. But accommodations do not require an instructor to provide specialized instruction for a student, and they are not going to apply the same way for all students or classes.
So this is an email that we created for professors that if a student approaches you and they're like, hey, I was previously on a 504 plan, or I have a disability, maybe even if they haven't received accommodations, like I just need some extra time on my test. We want to make sure that we're following the process. We don't want to accommodate students outside of CEDAR. So this is just a great template to kind of get them connected with us, because that's what they want to do to protect the university. So feel free to include us on this email. It kind of just goes into like, thank you for connecting with me today. You self-identified of having a disability. I wanted to follow up with information. And so that way they can get connected with us. Once we get this email, our office manager then, would send what the next steps are. And that's when we include our application link that they can fill out. And we can also do informational meetings too. So if the student just wants to know like what their options are, we can always do that as well.
We present classes, instructors can call sides it's like you just
and then this is another email example that maybe if you're suspecting a student could use accommodations. If you feel like they're struggling, we want to make sure we don't want to just assume they have a disability and be like, hey, I think you have ADHD. So we want to make sure that we're doing this tactfully. So this email includes additional resources. So it's kind of like I noticed you're having a hard time in this class. According to our discussions, you're understanding the material, just maybe testing's not going well. It might be worth exploring some additional resources. So we have tutoring on here, counseling, mental health, and the Center for Disabilities. And so that way, maybe a lot of people don't know our office even exists until someone tells them. That's kind of the conversation we're having a lot right now with spring is they're like, my professor just sent me here and I could have used this in the fall. And so just letting them know that we are there and that we're a resource.
Realizing as we're presenting this, we should probably add academic coaching to that list as well. Alrighty. So what happens if kind of a student has gone through this process and then they're coming to their instructor with a concern or a frustration or a complaint? Ideally, the best place to start is going to be that accommodation definition. Anything outside of what is listed in that student's approved accommodations and the definitions with it is not covered. So if a student says, hey, I have an attendance accommodation, you're like, yes, and it doesn't allow you to miss the first 8 weeks of class. Not part of the definition that we approve. And so that would be routing the student back to that. You can obviously copy and paste the definition, refer the student back to it. Instructors have that as part of the email that they get, as well as part of the instructor portal. Students also get the email and have a student portal. And so they have full access to that information as well. Instructors are not obligated to provide accommodations outside of that. So even if a student that you know, like that you're like, hey, like you're telling me that you need these supports, even if you feel like it would be equitable to provide that if they haven't gone through the process, the equitable way to approach that is to not provide accommodations outside of the official accommodation process. And ideally, we're not that scary. We really aren't. Getting a student connecting with us is fabulous. And then they're set up for all.
I just wanted to say, when she's saying don't accommodate outside of the accommodation process as it
Yes.
relates to a disability.
Yes.
Obviously, if a student had the flu or, that goes the attendance policy for faculty. So it's like if you have a student come up to you, go, I have severe anxiety and I need test extensions, and you don't have accommodations for those, you should not be providing those. You should be referring them to CETL so we can walk through that process to ensure we're treating all students equitably.
Yes, absolutely.
For those that don't know, this is our director.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Extenuating circumstances and non-disability related things, absolutely follow your same processes that you would for any other student. But as it pertains to disability, make sure they're connected with us. Thank you. And then loop us in as part of that. We're happy to help. We've either had the student referred back to us for clarification or looped in on an email, hopped on a call, whatever that may look like. Instructors, we can do this with the student, without the student, whatever makes sense for that process and kind of how that conversation is going. Ideally, we want to be reaching out about these things earlier rather than later, because something about accommodations is they are not retroactive. And so if a student is misunderstanding things, that can lead to a lot of kind of heartache and frustration that would have been a clarification from the start. No, we're good.
As soon as you feel there's a concern, reach out to us.
Yeah.
It's hard when we get emails at the end of the semester and they're like, oh, the student didn't show up for 4 weeks. And we're like, well, we can't do anything at this point. But if we get that right away, that you're like, I haven't seen this student in a week, we can get connected with that student and be like, hey, what's going on? It sounds like we might need to modify some accommodations. Or sometimes it's also having a conversation outside of accommodations and being like, maybe we need to take a step back from school right now and look at some other options.
I think you guys had a question online. There was a question in chat.
No, there's not. It's just Eric posting links.
Oh. Stop.
Questions. He's just being supportive from a distance. I was like, there's not. I was like, I'm moderating. Everyone just likes Eric.
He's very likable. Alrighty. And then just some suggestions that we hope you kind of walk out of here with beyond kind of what we've already covered. Some best practices are going to be incorporating universal design in your courses wherever possible. So providing things in multiple formats gets ahead of some of the requests for accommodations. And if you plan for that from the start, then it eases a lot of headache for instructors as well. And so that can be, if you're providing slides, providing a digital version as well. If you're providing handouts in class, having a digital version on your Canvas page, things like that. Being clear about expectations. This pertains to things like the attendance policy. If students have accommodations, like that can be a wonky one if you don't have an attendance policy outlined. And that includes just kind of expectations for rubrics and things like that. We have an accommodation called clarification on instructions, and sometimes students don't do well with hearing things audibly and they prefer having that. So having your instructions for assignments in multiple formats helps with that clarity as well. And then as you're attending trainings like this one, fabulous disability etiquette, universal design, inclusive communication, just kind of staying up to date on kind of what that looks like. And then collecting and incorporating feedback. We know the university has those lovely course eval information, just paying attention to things related to kind of like barriers that students might be identifying as part of that and incorporating that feedback. And then we also wanted to share, since this is kind of new to the university and we're trying to make sure that people are aware of this. It used to be a different office that handled pregnancy related condition and accommodations. And then as of this fall, that has been wrapped up into CEDAR services as well. And so now it is a streamlined process. Students with ADA 504 or Title IX pregnancy related accommodations all come through our office as a kind of a first stop. And then we help them navigate that process. And so that brings us to all syllabi should include some type of syllabus statement around our services and making sure they're available, because oftentimes students don't know about us until too late sometimes. And so just kind of sharing about our office, the services we provide, and having that up-to-date syllabus statement. So if you're kind of gearing up for this semester and you notice that your syllabus statement in your current syllabus does not include pregnancy or related conditions, that language in there, then that is our old syllabus statement, and we encourage you to update it with the new one, which can be found on our website for the instructors, and we're going to be sharing the slides and recording, and the links are in there as well.
So these are just some additional resources that we thought might be helpful. So we have the faculty's rights and responsibilities. That next attachment is just how we look at reasonable accommodations. So if you're curious into more detail of like, I wonder how we got here, you can click on that, kind of follow our trail and just see where we're at. We also have the syllabus statement, and then as well as a link to the instructor portal. And that is everything. So questions, yeah.
I'm sorry I came late because I couldn't find the building. You're going to share the slideshow
Yes.
and even the recording, perhaps?
Yes.
Okay.
It will be on the CTL website after this event. I'm planning to make email everybody where it's going to be located with a link directly to it.
That would be great. Thank you. I have another question too, and I don't know if it's out of line or not, but do you make any accommodations for religious observance things like this? So for example, next month Ramadan will start and there'll be a lot of fasting students. Or, like, I don't know, for people that have different religious holidays that maybe aren't recognized here, are there any kind of accommodations for that kind of thing or not?
That wouldn't be through our office. I think that would kind of fall again under the attendance policy. So if you do have a student that approaches you with that, I think you would just kind of handle that, based off the attendance, maybe talk to your department and see if it's something they've handled before. And that way everyone's kind of on the same page with that.
Also maybe DINA students.
Yeah, I was gonna say also looping in DINA students.
Carry Feely because you can't discriminate on the basis of religion.
Right.
So but they would probably have some good
that's
guidance
funny
there.
because it can go either way, right?
Oh, and you were just out of the DINA students office.
Yeah, say that they will just, it's up to the discretion of the dean of students isn't going to tell you what to do. Like, it's up to the discretion of the faculty. And so, like, I would say what I would do is, like, we're compassionate to students, but like a religion is not a disability.
Right.
For sure. And
Yeah.
so it would be like when a student would come in and they would say, I want to do a hardship withdrawal because I bought a house and now I don't have money to pay my student loans.
Yeah.
And you're like, buying a house is a financial choice, not a hardship. And so we recognize that, like, there are choices in life that we make. But I think that there are things we can do of saying, like, I can be flexible about some assignments, recognizing that this is important to you, this is important to the culture that you come from. And then I would say the bigger thing to look at is, if you're worried about it being discrimination, is to talk to
IPO.
not IPO, but
I don't know.
Human rights. Yes.
OCRI.
OCRI.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Office of Civil Rights.
Okay.
Yes,
Gotcha.
and you can just email ocri@uidaho.edu and say, I want to be sure that I'm doing everything appropriately and I'm not violating anyone's rights. I have a student with this circumstance. If I proceed this way in my course, would I be violating any of their rights? And they can just give you that information. Typically they'll say, no, you're not violating any rights. And yeah, you're typically just
Something extra, it's normally the deans of student, in combination with the IPO will send an email to the community
Right.
about if you have any questions when Ramadan starts.
Right.
They can provide you some resources, or always talk with the IPO too, because they deal with these cases all the time. Yeah, they normally send an email about the week before start or the day before starts, something like that. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Kind of adjacent to that, sometimes we also get questions around kind of like English as a second language, and that is going to be another thing that doesn't fall into disability related. If a student with English as a second language also has disability related barriers, then absolutely they can work with us. But not being a native English speaker would not be a qualifying disability on it at all.
I have a question. Do disabilities, do students still get disabilities if they study like at Moss, or if they study abroad, or if they do anything like that? Do they still get disabilities through CDAR?
Yeah, so we provide accommodations for students in like Boise and Moss and things like that. And then we are able to provide kind of like what they have been determined eligible through our institution. If they study abroad, they can take that with them. And so, yeah, we do.
We cover all U of I campuses.
And
All of them.
We are a land grant institution, so we also have 4-H accommodations for the state. So for non-college students as well. Yeah.
So what are the logistics? So I'm working now in a D program, which is fully online. So what are the logistics of getting students the physical things they need in order to complete their online graduate work? If they're like, say, in DC or Florida.
We've mailed things before to them. Sometimes we look, it's a little easier sometimes when they're like, I mean, DC, that's really far. But like if they're in Coeur d'Alene, it's, we have that center there that we can send stuff. But yeah, we've mailed things. We figure out a way. All of our appointments, we can always do them over Zoom too. So no one has to be in person. We can do Zoom and that's for even if you're learning how to use the note-taking software, you don't have to be in person. The alternative text. So we are willing to make things work on Zoom as well.
Technology makes a lot of those things a lot easier, and so online classes can sometimes be more accommodating already as nature, but then we troubleshoot based off of the course requirements for sure.
Mine just kind of piggybacks off of that one. So you used to offer smart pens for accommodations. Do you still do that?
Still got those. They're still hanging on.
Yep, specialized pens, specialized paper, specialized ink, and we provide them at no cost for students.
We're not sure how much longer because the company has discontinued them. So we still have a rather large batch and we're hoarding them. But right now, and there's really no replacement that is similar.
They discontinued them.
We don't know. Every disability office is so frustrated with it right now because we do have students that use them.
Absolutely.
But yeah,
Back to school and
The
volume.
policies.
No tags to.
yeah, they're a great recording device and everything, but
The companies seem to be.
now we're okay. We have bulk recorders.
Yeah, right. Like I said, they're still hanging on. So
Yep.
right now we're still good, but we'll see.
I borrow one for my middle school again?
Yeah,
Still.
So is the note-taking software, is that not allowed for regular students?
No, they can. We just
But they would have to pay for it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
and then so a lot of the note taking. They kind of fall into different buckets. One of the accommodations is approval to record, which is going to let students record in whatever way they see fit. And so that can be recording audio on their phone, recording through the program and software that we offer, or using the smart pen or a digital recorder that they check out through our office or their own. And so any one of those options is going to be under approval to record. Some professors do have kind of like, hey, like I generally don't want students recording, and then our accommodations would supersede that instructional preference. There are a couple of situations that we've navigated on a case by case basis, but in general, the accommodation does mean that regardless of instructor preferences, the students would be allowed to use that. But general students can absolutely use note-taking software as well. They just wouldn't get it through our office if they don't identify as a student with disabilities and have identified that as an accommodation.
We've had students who graduate and they purchase smart pens. They're like,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I need this for life.
Yeah, smart pen is though. What is it?
It's just, it looks like, yeah, it just looks like a regular pen. But it comes with a specialized notebook, and you hit record on that notebook and it's gonna record the audio and track where you're writing. So you could play back that audio and it's in all of its recording, or some students like it because you can hit you can put a star. So if the professor says something along the lines of like, this is important, this will be on the test, you can go back and click that star and hear what was being said at that time.
For some of our students that need to like step out for disability related flares or things like that in class, it's nice to be able to like let it record, come back, and then be able to fill in their notes after the fact as well. Or for our students that are not able to keep up, they can take abbreviated notes and then redo their notes at a later pace. And so the smart pen can be really nice for
Can
that.
we still download notes to the computer and stuff?
Yep.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Some of our students just like having the audio file to like listen to on their walks.
So what would I do if I'm an instructor for a course and I get an email telling me one of my students has accommodations that I feel like don't work with my course?
So we have on our accommodation letters, kind of the processes for that. That is going to engage kind of like the fundamental alteration process. So ideally, first up, you're giving us a call. We're kind of talking through that. If you're like, hey, this really doesn't work, we've talked through what the definition is, and you're like, hey, no, this is not going to work with the way that my course is structured and the course requirements of it, and there's no way to get kind of creative around it. That's when we would engage the fundamental alteration process, and you'd connect with our director about the logistics for that.
And even like, I mean, Katelyn navigated something today where a student had been approved for your computer for written response, and the professor reached out and said, hey, this is a Spanish class, and using Word gives them access to the correct spelling and things, and that's how this class is graded. So we're like, okay, well, that probably would be a fundamental alteration, but let's first reach out to the student to find out if they even use this. And so basically the student has not been using this accommodation, so we're just going to remove it. And then, but we have to put that in writing. And so we have it in writing. So if the student comes back later and says, hey, I wasn't allowed to use this, we're like, yeah, because you said you didn't use it. So we removed it. We notified you. That's all in writing. And so then that way we don't have to go through the fundamental alteration process because it is a very time consuming, and oftentimes we can find alternate ways. But
Yeah, we can look at alternative accommodations. Just because this one doesn't work, we can look at additional resources for the student. That way it's not just like you get no accommodations. We're like, well, you can still get accommodations. They're going to look a little different, and maybe they weren't what you were expecting, but we still want to make sure that student has resources.
And that goes back to the interactive process. If we can document and show that we have engaged in the interactive process, then we're protecting the student, the instructor, the institution. Yeah.
I have a question. It's about, I can see that you have a lot of good technological devices. And my question is there like a specific training for the students that are going to use those devices, or they learn in the actual day they maybe must be taking like
That is a
exams?
great question. So if it's for testing accommodations, then we have the option for them to, if they're concerned about it and they're not sure how to use the software, we have them connect with one of our staff to go through a demo for that beforehand. Things like the note-taking software or like computer for written response or anything they're physically checking out from our office, we have a whole process where we have them meet with one of our staff and connect to figure out how to use it, kind of troubleshoot anything, often helping them download things onto their like Chrome extensions and things like that. So we can ensure that it's going well and the student isn't presented with more barriers to get it all set up. for themselves. And then that way they also have a point of contact. So if anything goes wrong or they're getting weird error messages, they already have someone that they can come to for that. There are a couple, I'm thinking one of our note-taking softwares is really intuitive and easy to use. And so for that one, we often just send them the instructions on how to use it with the instructions to follow up. So for most cases, they're getting a hands-on option either over Zoom or in person on how to utilize it. But for some of those more easy user-friendly ones, they just let us know if they're having issues.
All right. That's everything. Thank you everyone for coming. We have, if you're online, you wouldn't mind filling out this quick feedback form. And if you're in person, if you wouldn't mind scanning this, we would love your feedback. If you guys want paper ones to fill out in here instead of doing it on your phone, you can also do that. Does anyone want a paper one to fill out who's in person?